Hello, voice nerds. This is Toby Ricketts, and this is VO Life, my monthly chat with people who are big in the voiceover world. We've got movers and shakers from all over, from agents to actors and everything in between. So welcome. It's good to have you along. Very excited about today's chat because I'm speaking with one of the biggest names in audiobooks today. He has narrated over 1,000 titles, been nominated for 40 Audie Awards, won 17 of them. He's in the Audible Hall of Fame. I'm going to just keep going on because I want to get across how ridiculous this is. And he's got the most Audie nominations for a single male narrator on titles of anyone. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Simon Vance to the podcast.
Hi, Toby. Nice to meet you.
It's very nice to meet you as well. Just starting off with you come across those coincidences in life and you're like, what were the chances of that happening? And I just wanted to spell out exactly how we got in touch because it's one of the biggest coincidences that's ever occurred to me. So the scene is that I've just listened to the Sandman series on Audible, of which you play a part. You've got a character role in that. And I wanted to see the film Dune that was coming up, and so I thought, well, I want to read the text so I can see the movie. So I'm going to listen to the audiobook before that, which you also happen to narrate. And I hadn't quite started it yet. And then my mum, who lives here in New Zealand with me, said, "Oh, I caught up with an old friend that I haven't seen since like the 1960s the other day because I saw him on Facebook, and he mentioned that he was in some sort of voiceover thing, and I was like, oh, who's that? I might know his name." And she said, "Simon Vance," and I said, "I know that name." Because I was like, where have I heard that before? And then it just so happened that you guys have caught up at exactly the moment that I'd been listening to all your stuff on Audible. So I was just blown away by what a coincidence that was. And what a small world we live in.
Well, it's extraordinary. Well, in a way, it's got smaller. The pandemic helped because of sort of people having more time to spend on computers and Facebook and so on. And that's what happened. I think I posted something and your mum saw it and said, "Are you the Simon Vance that we used to play with on the Brighton beach and Hove and Saltdean and stuff?" We had chats together and our families were very close. And I kept in touch with a couple of people. There's a girl, Penny, who was a great friend of your mum's too. And of course, your uncles. I was going to say your brothers. No, that's your mum's brothers. That's the way it works. But they used to come over to our house all the time, our birthday parties and everything else.
Isn't that amazing?
But she got in touch with me and said, and I said, "Yeah, let's chat." So we got on, and she's been over there since the early 70s in New Zealand, and I've been in California for almost exactly 20 years now.
Wow,
20 years. 20 years next week, I think.
Is that right? Well, congratulations.
30
years.
30 years. I'm sorry.
At some point, it doesn't really matter, does it?
No, but anyway, we got in touch. We had a nice long chat, and it was so much fun catching up. And then you sent me an email going. And the funny thing is, it came to me, Toby Ricketts. You know my mum. And I go, Ricketts? Ricketts? I don't know any Ricketts. Oh, hang on, New Zealand. That was Sue Somerville.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And there was the connection. It's amazing how these things come full circle. So you grew up in Brighton in the UK, as did I. Great place to grow up. In terms of audio back in, when you were growing up, because lots of people think, oh, you've always done audiobooks, obviously. You've had an interest from a young age. And you kind of did, but there wasn't really much around at that time, right? There was sort of vinyl records with sort of Richard Burton reading things. What other kind of influences did you have from a young age?
Oh, the funny thing is, audiobooks was never going to be a career of mine. It was never a choice. This wasn't an active choice. It sort of backed into it and I became good at it by accident. But I was we're growing up in England, born in the 50s. So radio, TV in the 60s. There was a lot of storytelling. Listening to The Voice on the radio. Watching, listen. Well, there was Watch with Mother, Listen with Mother on radio, Watch with Mother, lunchtimes when you're really young. Jack O'Norrie was an afternoon show on the BBC at sort of around 5 p.m. 15 minutes of an actor sitting there telling stories. So that was an influence on me. I also happened to be very good at reading. I remember in class being able to read and sort of, I remember a particular time reading, I think it might have been a Joseph Conrad or something, and just getting lost in it. I was about 14 or 15, but never really thinking this is what I'm going to do. I was into being an actor for a lot of time, but never took that seriously until I was in my 30s, because it seemed to be a career for, well, it was something people played at. It wasn't a serious job, acting. That was my original opinion. My parents were both in the medical profession, and grandparents had been, and so on. So I was all set for maybe looking at that. Nearly became a civil engineer. Maybe we can talk about that later. But I sort of I moved away from that. But I ended up having friends at school, grammar school in Brighton, high school in the States, whatever it was in my teens, whose dad worked in the local radio station, and I started in radio, and then I went to London. And joined Radio 4, the national speech channel of the BBC, speech-based. And he went there, and I followed him because he went a few years before me. And I thought, well, if he can do it, I can do it. Yeah. And it seemed like fun. I enjoyed it. But and while I was in London, the RNIB, he worked for the RNIB, this friend who'd gone to Radio 4 before me. He worked for the RNIB talking book service for the blind, reading books for them for charity. And when I got to London, he'd left, he'd gone somewhere else, but I was on my own, and I had a lot of spare time. And I thought, well, what did he do to fill his time? And I'll do that. So I started reading books for the blind in the 80s. This was 1983. I first went up to London, and I started reading for the blind, did one afternoon a week for the whole 9 years that I was up there working for the BBC. And when I came to the States, I was determined to be an actor, and but I didn't go to New York or LA. I was based in San Francisco, and there was really only theater. So I did a lot of work in theater, but my then brother-in-law knew somebody who worked in audiobooks. And if you want to earn some extra money, do audiobooks. So I did some audiobooks, or I got signed by this one company, Blackstone Audiobooks, and I've been with them ever since. And that was the beginning. But I never, ever saw it as a career path.
I think that's something that a lot of my sort of other voiceover artists, including myself, have remarked on, that the fact that they always kind of knew it existed as this kind of, hallowed, that imagine being able to, use your voice and get paid for it. I mean, because I'm from a radio background as well. And there was always this sense that there were these jobs, but it wasn't kind of a real job. Like I couldn't go for that. I don't even know how to get into it. And it does seem to be a shared thing that you gain skills along your life, and then suddenly it just falls into place and you're doing it. And suddenly you're like, I'm doing it. This is amazing. Which might be different these days because there are so many more people, I think, wanting to be voice artists these days, that there are more paths that are sort of just laid out for this sort of career, that it is a valid career path. But at the same time, there's so much more workaround for things like explainer videos and genres that simply didn't exist sort of, 5 years ago. So it's interesting that, it has changed this whole career and how to get into it.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, for me, I sort of backed into it accidentally, and that worked for me because I have issues with, wanting to be good at something. If I'm going to be a success at it, I need to be good at it. And I didn't need to be good at audiobooks. I was reading for the blind when I started it. That was my apprenticeship. And I came over and I thought, well, I can do this. Won't lead to anything. Whereas with acting, it was always a bit of a struggle because you go into a casting or whatever, and what do they want? What do they want? You're always thinking, what can I do to make an impact? And I never had to do that with audiobooks because it was never a goal. I've got a good friend, Scott Brick, who's another very successful audiobook narrator here in California, in Los Angeles. And he talks about wanting to be an audiobook narrator from a young age. I mean, younger than me, but he was, that was his goal. Once he recognized it was a thing, he decided to go for it. So he took a career path. But me, it's always been a little bit accidental. And it wasn't until about 15 years ago that I finally accepted that I was good at it and I could make it a career, and actually backed off doing theater and stuff like that. I'm in Los Angeles now and looking at working in film and TV at some point along the way. But that's a whole other story.
Yeah, but, absolutely.
I'm enjoying the audiobooks. Have been very good to me, and I've enjoyed them. But it's a complete surprise. But as you say, these days audiobooks has got a much higher profile. I was working it in the 90s, and it was just cassettes then. People driving along with 25 cassettes beside them and slipping one in the car each time, and so it wasn't a hugely popular thing.
Yeah, sales reps that were driving thousands of miles a week.
Truckers were a huge audience, but it wasn't until Steve Jobs or whoever, the MP3 players, and Steve Jobs particularly with the iPod, that suddenly it became possible to have a whole book by pressing a single button. And suddenly in 2002, 3, 4, the business just huge. It was growing before that, but it just expanded hugely.
So that would have been sort of in the middle of your sort of your audiobook career so far, and you noticed a real uptick in sort of in sales, in demand for actually reading these books.
Oh yeah, it was very up and down in the early days. I mean, I got here in '92. I started doing books either later that year or at the beginning of '93. I can't exactly remember. But I was working for Blackstone, doing books here and there, working in theatre mostly. I had a very good year in '95. I worked in the theatre every week. Around '97, business dropped off. I was still with only Blackstone, and it was horrifying because I was going through a divorce and a separation, not necessarily in that order: separation, then divorce, and it was crippling when they backed off sending me books because I didn't have anything else, didn't have a lot of theatre at that point, and then things started coming back later on, and it was very noticeable for me. I think I won my first award in the year 2000. Then the next couple of years, and it was, as I say, 2005, suddenly I had a job. So I stopped doing theatre because theatre took me away. There was rehearsals every day of the week and so on and so forth. And some of the audiobooks I was doing in the early days required me to fly to New York or Seattle or somewhere else to do the recording in studios, because I was mostly recording at home, which is very unusual in the early days in the 90s. There weren't many of us who did that, and sort of frowned upon by a lot of the mainstream people until they realized actually some of these independent guys can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just going back on a couple of things you said there about being in the theatre and also doing audiobooks. And I've just come from a weekend teaching sort of how to do voiceover, and there were some theatre or actors in the room. And one of the things I had to tell them was about when you are doing on stage work, you are projecting and making everything big so that in the back seats they can hear what you're saying. But in audiobooks, it's much more subtle. And so you have to have quite a range in terms of being an actor, and then sort of bringing that back. And I told them to instead of projecting to the back seats, you're basically performing for the tiny person inside the microphone. Have you got any sort of thoughts on how it differs, theatre acting to audiobook?
Well, yeah. I mean, for me, I was fortunate because I did do all those years of radio and broadcasting, where you were basically. I'm the cliche at the time then, and probably still is, imagine your grandma sitting the other side of the microphone and you're just talking to her. Like I'm talking to you, you're just there. I'm not going to project to you, Toby. Hey, old Toby. And the difference to some extent, I think, is the amount of breath support and so on. You're on stage and you've got to project. So you've got to be subtle. You can't be storming around Shakespearean-like all the time. You've got to be subtle, but you give it more support. You don't have to do that. The breath control is very more nuanced in the studio. It's much gentler and
because the mic picks up everything too, doesn't it? It's a very sensitive instrument. Indeed,
yes. You have to be careful, and it's so storytelling is so. Gentle.
It's a trust exercise in a way, isn't it? Like you're creating a world and inviting someone into that world, and it's quite a responsibility, I think.
Yeah. It's a funny thing. I mean, I can listen to myself. I'm not listening to my voice. I mean, that's a thing you find with some new people in the industry and some older ones perhaps, but I've got a wonderful voice and I'm listening. You can tell they're sort of enjoying the sound of their voice and doing wonderful things with it, and it's gorgeous. But I'm listening to the story. So I found myself, I don't coach people, and I wouldn't coach them to say, well, see how your story sounds to yourself, but there is a way in which I'm listening. On some level, I'm listening to myself. Am I making sense? Does this serve the story or not? And I can tell when it becomes false, when I'm drifting or pushing or whatever. And so while you're putting the audience out there, or the one person you're talking to, that one person is in my head at the same time.
Absolutely.
In some strange way.
Yeah. Before we leave the sort of your history and how you got into audiobooks, it's like I definitely see that there's something in common with my career in terms of, you were able to do many years of practice in a real situation, reading for the blind. So you were basically doing audiobooks, but without the pay. But, getting that practice, which we always talk about in voiceover training. And then it's a kind of a slow start. It's a very slow curve up. You get some books, and as soon as something like an award happens, it seems to sort of go exponential. And then it's sort of like the world is your oyster, and you learn at an exponential rate. Would you say that that's sort of how it's happened? And what happens after that? Does it sort of plateau? Does it keep on going? Can you just do what you want at that point?
I'm on the downward slope now. I'm way up over the top. I'm in decline. It's a really interesting thing. It's one of the things I have a problem with when people ask me, how does it work? How do you get in the industry and so on and so forth? How does it grow? Because I came into it in a different way, a way that people don't, as you explained it. I did my apprenticeship for 8 years, and there was no pressure at all. These days, you come into the industry, and it's almost like you've got to be hot the moment you open your mouth. People rush into books, and they take on more than they can handle, and it's almost like with auditioning. Well, you get sort of one chance, as it were, and if you don't nail it the first time, the fear is you're not going to get a second chance. And I had a lot of chances to nail that, to grow and stuff. And I may have had a gift to begin with, so I was fortunate in that respect. So I didn't need to learn, although I have heard some of my books from the 80s. There's a couple I did for the RIB that they sold to Audible UK, and they're available, but I made sure they put them under a different name, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, because I've heard them. And they were like, okay, that was a beginner's voice. Yeah, even I listened to voices, books I'd done 20 years ago, and there's a slight, there's a little squirminess about it.
Well, that's a good thing in a way, isn't it? Because I mean, if you're not getting better, and it's nice to see the progression.
In terms of how it went, for me, it was again no pressure for the years that I was working here commercially, because it was something filling in the time or a little bit of money on the side, because acting on the stage was my thing. And it was very gentle, and it started to take off. I won the first award. It was one of these earphone awards. I've got a pile of them here. They got a pile of them.
Pile of them. There's the spare room full.
Let me just go into the vault here. Audiophile magazine, which is a US magazine that does a great job of promoting and reviewing. They send these out to narrators every so often. Couple every month. They're excellent, and it's just a nice little honor to have. And I got my first one in 2000, and I wouldn't have said I noticed a big change. I won my first Audie in 2006, and that's the sort of the Oscars of the audiobook industry over here. We pretend to. And
the catering's not quite as good.
No, but it's very flattering. I mean, it's phenomenal, and. I won my first one in 05, 06, and it does help you. But the business, the business of audiobooks it's changed over the years. It was still growing then. In 2011 or 12, Audible was bought by Amazon. Audible had started up as being just a distributor of audiobooks, a sort of central place on the internet that people could download them. So all the publishers sort of didn't give their stuff, but they channeled it through Audible. And then Audible started doing what they said they weren't going to do in the first place, and that's produce their own audiobooks, and everybody got very uptight, and Audible got bigger and bigger, became the elephant in the room, taking up all the oxygen, and then Amazon bought them and started using them to unload masses of titles. They wanted everything on audio. So around 2000, whatever it was, 11, 12, 13, they demanded of the publishers, or producers, they wanted them to bring in as many of these books as possible. So everybody and their grandmother got the chance to do audiobooks, and the standards just dropped. It was a bad few years in retrospect. Business actually dropped off because the main publishers, the people that I did work for and paid me regular union rates, they weren't putting so many books out because they were for audio. And it took a few years to recover. And the milk, amongst those narrators who came in, who weren't perhaps experienced, the milk rose to the top, and some extraordinarily good narrators that came from that. And I think things have leveled out now. In the last few years, I think it took 3 or 4 or 5, 6 years for the for the business to really settle. Because even given my level of award winning, I had lots of gaps in my schedule. I got very depressed at times about the work because it wasn't happening. But it's come back in the last few years, and it's continued to expand now. But it's all a little more sensible than it was a decade or so ago.
Right.
But it's sort of been up and down. It hasn't been a direct, like that.
Yeah.
It's been sort of, oh, this is good. Oh, this is bad. Oh, this is, oh no, yeah, oh, it's good. And then it's sort of come up now, and I think we're on a steady trajectory. Right. I'm having to turn down books now. It's a
good position to be in. Yeah.
It's a good position to be in. Unfortunately, it's a whole other story. I've got there's I don't want to name names, but there's a publisher that sends me some fantasy books, which were great at the time, but they've gone on too long. They're not very well written. They're self-published things. They've got an audience, and I don't want to knock the authors, because it's, my God, being an author is incredible, but they're not my cup of tea. I'm locked into this series, and I've had a 27-hour book and a 17-hour book, and I just today started another 27-hour book, all for the same publisher. They're all of the same sort of another fantasy, and I've had to turn down books from publishers I love with really good books. That I can't do. I wish
it's funny. It's funny how, being a sort of the subcontractor life, or being self-employed, does have such ebbs and flows. And I've had to, counsel a few sort of voiceover artists on that kind of slightly upward trajectory, that you will have weeks when no one calls you, and it's not the end of the world. It's like, it's the time to do your marketing, and like it does seem to pick up as long as if you start putting the time in to promoting yourself and to finding new ways to work. But it can be quite disheartening, I think. And it's nice to hear from someone with so much experience that it happens to even you with the awards,
Well, it's just that I remember John Cleese saying, getting very frustrated because people were looking for John Cleese types. He'd go through the career of an actor or something like that, and it would go through various things, get me John Cleese, and then it would get me a John Cleese type. And John Cleese is going, but what about me? I think I feared there was a time when get me a Simon Vance type, because Simon Vance is too busy. He won't have time. I think there was a lot of assumptions along the way that Simon's too busy. So I'd have to keep going out and reminding him, hey, I got some space here.
Yeah,
I've got some time if you've got anything for me. But you're right. It's about communicating, being in touch with the publishers and the industry as a whole, and keep reminding them that you're there, even at my level. People forget, or they think, oh, he's okay, he doesn't need work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some specific projects. This is basically just me like having a slight fanboy because I want to peek behind the curtain. The two I mentioned at the start, which the Sandman series, which is on Audible, which is just it's one of the best dramatic productions, audio-only dramatic productions I've ever heard. The level of acting and the level of production is just, it blew my mind when I listened to it. So do look, if you're into this stuff, then do look it up. What was the process? Because there's lots of dialogue in that, and I can't imagine they got everyone together in the same studio. So was that managed from afar, and was it live directed sessions? Did you have to travel? How did that sort of turn out?
I think a few years, because I only have a few lines in the first one, and I had more in the second one. They're different because the second one was right in the middle of the pandemic. First one, well, here's the thing. I get on very well with the director, Dirk Maggs, producer, director. And
fantastic producer.
Oh my God, he's incredible. He and I, he's a Sussex guy, I don't know where he was born, but he went to a friend's, same grammar school as a friend of mine was taught by my friends. That is a small world stuff. I mean, you could go in detail and stuff like that. But I bumped into him at one of the Audie Awards, and we got chatting because they had a lot in common. And I also happened to know Neil Gaiman, so that was helpful. And he hired me for it, and I wanted to do it over there. He's willing to let me do it from here remotely. But never on any occasion have I been in the studio with anybody else. Well, other friends, Ray Porter, who's another audiobook narrator, extraordinary actor.
Oh, he's brilliant. Yeah.
Film and everything else. He's done a lot of good stuff. He lives a couple of miles from here. But he went into the studio with, Michael Sheen was there, Neil was there, 3 or 4 other British actors were there, and he had a phenomenal time for his week. But he did some he played Gilbert, I think, in the first season, and it's just phenomenal work that he does. He's a very talented guy, but he got the pleasure to meet of meeting people. But I went there, and it just happened to coincide with a couple of days after my mum died. But I booked it, so I went in and did it. But that was the first Lucian the Librarian session that I did. And I just sat at a microphone, and Dirk sat beside me, and he read the other lines. And we left the gap, I respond, but he knew what's, I think, well, it was James McAvoy. So I don't know if he'd recorded James at that point, but he knew how it was going to be. So he fed me the lines, and I responded. That was the first season, or first act. Act 2 and Act 3 I did here. This is my studio here.
We're going to get into that a bit later. I'll ask you some questions about that.
Sure. And I just, I think, we did it remotely. Yeah, we did it. What's the
have a Source Connect or Clean Feed or something? Yeah.
You know what you're talking about. You know something about voiceover, don't you? So we did Source Connect, and with a studio in London. And again, he read the lines, and I responded with a suitable space that he knew what he likes. There's one part of Act 3 that I did a whole sequence. I knew it was coming up. He wasn't sure if it was going to be included or not. I can't remember. It depended on their choice of what they were going to do, which episodes and so on. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to go in the studio and have a go just for the heck of it. One morning I woke up and I thought, oh, my voice feels good. That's the way it is with voiceover. Sometimes you wake up and go, I sound good this morning. So I went in the studio because it was like a 20-minute read or something like that. And I just launched into it, and I sent it to him, and I said, if you want to use this, or I'll do it again. And it came around that they then decided they were going to use that scene. And I thought, were you okay with that? Do you want any other goes? And he said, well, what do you think about this accent or this accent? So I went back in the studio. I did about 4 or 5 times more, way more than he needed. And I think he's using the original.
Yeah, that's so often the way. There's something in that first read that just is fresh and and probably your interpretation as well.
Yeah, and that was not with Source Connect. That was just me doing it.
Right.
So I did that off my back, because I'm a storyteller. I read books. I don't have a producer in my ear all the time.
Yeah.
So
more comfortable, exactly. And the other one I wanted to pick your brains about was the first book in Dune, because you've been the narrator for the series in Dune. That must have picked up in popularity over the last couple of years with Villeneuve's beautiful film that has just come out recently. There were a few interesting things about the production of Dune, though, that I found interesting, and I don't want to knock the production because I think it was a fantastic production and your parts were just absolutely sublime, but it differed from other audiobooks in that it was a mixture of single narrator doing characters, and in other chapters were actors doing scenes with narrator in between. And I wondered whether they explained how that was going to work to you, or any kind of detail about how that occurred.
It's an interesting thing. I think they do a much better job on it today, because I think people are much more experienced in the industry with multiple voice or whatever they want to do. I'm not sure what their decision was based on. I'm not sure whether the people who did it, and I know them, at a distance, I've met them, and they're good producers, but they decided to split it so that, and I don't know what the thought process was on what scenes are we going to make like audio drama, as it were, and what scenes are we going to have single narrator. Yeah. I got a script saying, these are your bits to read. So I went through them, and it was great because Scott Brick, who does some of that, who does the voice, I think he plays Paul Atreides in the originals, and he's worked a lot on the Dune books with Brian's Frank Herbert's son Brian, and he got from him, before we did this, he got all the pronunciations.
Right. Yeah.
All the authentic pronunciations, not like the movie that was made way back in the 80s, which had all the wrong pronunciations in it, and Frank Herbert was apocalyptic, or at least very disappointed anyway. But we had all the right pronunciations. So I got all the list and pronunciation stuff like that. And I just recorded my bit. But I wanted to hear what the other voices were doing, because from my point of view, and it's been pointed out to me sometimes, is I do a voice because I like to not make a huge character thing. I don't overdo voices unless it's Dickens or something, and it's a gift then. But I want to differentiate them, and I give them a sort of voice or an accent or whatever. And of course, that wouldn't be, when they did the scenes, that wouldn't be the voice of the actor. I did
exactly. It's a
how it
different
works.
interpretation, isn't it? It's two people having a go at the same character. You're going to get a different result. And without those interacting, it's going to be a different result.
I've never gone back and listened to it, and I'm sorry. I think I'd be too critical of it because I
Right,
feel
yeah.
I got a little bit of a failing on my part, perhaps, or but it wasn't offered. But I should have done some more research on who's playing what and how are they doing it. And I'm not sure any of the actors would have been able to tell me because it was recorded later, their part.
I don't think so. I think your parts were absolutely fantastic, and your interpretations of the characters were bang on. So I think you did a fantastic job in that.
It's an interesting choice, as you say, and it has been successful. It won. It was my second or third Audie back in the day, and yes, I did get, because I have a one of those Google alerts if my name crops up somewhere in the world.
Yep.
Hey. And for months it was like, the list of best selling audiobooks or something, and Dune was up there again.
Yeah. Because I only bring it up because when I listen to audiobooks, I am hypercritical because I'm thinking, if I was doing this, how would I do it? And like, what does this all mean? Whereas I'm not. It's difficult when you're in the industry to become completely immersed in it because you're constantly. So, do you listen to audiobooks, and do you find that difficult in terms of you're constantly kind of interrogating the production?
Well, I don't listen to it. In fact, very rarely these days. There was a period when I drive. We originally lived in the Bay Area, San Francisco, my wife and I. And my wife has been teaching at UC Irvine down in Orange County for the last 15 years. And 8 years ago, we moved down here partially for about 3 or 4 years. We had a house up there and we had a small rental down here so that we could be together all week. She was flying down once a week and flying back. And I was exploring Los Angeles and the movie work and stuff. So I drive the 5 or 6 hours backwards and forth. A very good friend of mine, Grover Gardner, who's been in audiobooks about as long as I have, and he does wonderful biographies and stuff, Carnegie and Rockefeller and all the rest of it. And I love those. Also, around the time, or maybe even a bit before that, I listened to some of Scott's books because he's a friend. And there was a lovely woman, Kate Fleming, who sadly died. But I knew her well, and I listened to some of hers. And I've listened to a couple of other books. But like you, it's hard for me to listen because because most of the people in the industry I know. I mean, I listened to some. I did enjoy listening to books. There were a couple of British actors I liked, and I can't remember their names now, but they did some classics that I enjoyed that I hadn't done. So I didn't mind listening to them. No, I tend not to because it's difficult. And also, I haven't got the time.
Yeah, exactly. If you're not commuting or doing some kind of long distance or yard work, which is my favorite time to listen to audiobooks.
No.
And, I found, I actually have the opposite effect as well sometimes when I find someone who's so good and I like so much that it actually starts to give me other strings to my bow. I find I start to learn things from them through their interpretations. And Derek Perkins is one of those who's done a number of audiobooks, non-fictions. And I loved his non-fiction delivery and really took lots of inspiration from it in a way. So it's it can be quite freeing in a way, and to find new ways of doing things.
Yeah.
Do you happen to sort of have a favorite, or do you have genres that you sort of specialize in, be it fiction or non-fiction? Are you sort of pigeonholed, or do you try and keep it nice and broad so that you are applicable to more jobs?
I'd like to keep it broad. I did, because when I came into the industry, we did everything. In the early 90s, I got everything. A lot of things, quite rightfully, are now going to people who are more appropriate for the characters and for the parts and so on and so forth. I think what I did was good. It was never a caricature and stuff like that. I remember doing a piece, an author had written a piece set in the Caribbean. It was an English, it was like 5 different characters, and one was an English detective, and there was some locals and stuff. So I researched accents and did them all. And the author was like so impressed and loved what I'd done. But I'd never be asked to do that kind of book now. Quite right. Looking at things differently now. Yeah. But I did everything. I do get concerned, and partly three fantasy books in a row is driving me crazy. It's like, I don't want any more of these. I just don't want to do them anymore. And it's just one publisher, and that's basically a lot of what they do is those self-published books. But for my main people, they send me everything across the board. Of course, being English, I did all the Charles Dickens and,
Great Expectations, I think you did. And Sherlock Holmes. Yeah, that's pretty
the
good.
Sherlock Holmes, I love that.
Yeah.
Yes, a lot of that stuff. Yeah, I mean, I've done so many books. People say, well, what's your favorite? I know you're probably going to ask that. It's like,
I'll just put a line through that question.
Which day of the week is, I don't know. I mean, yeah, we'll get to that question if we do. Because I've got a few that I've really enjoyed over the years. But Anthony Trollope and all the rest of it. I've done all those Thomas Hardys and stuff. I mean, there's still probably some I haven't done. Back in the day, you see, back in the 90s and the aughts and before it really took off, most of the audience, the customer base was libraries. That was where they were aiming. So it was all the classics. These days, it's changed so that it's new books. Any new book has got to have an audio version. So that's where the pressure is now. Which is a shame because I think there's still a lot of classic books out there that I would love to do.
Yeah, especially movies when there's movies involved as well, like such as Dune.
Pick them up. Yeah, I mean, if there's something out there, they'll pick it up. So it'll get pushed and so on. But yeah, the new books definitely. They want them done yesterday.
Yeah, totally. So going into some of sort of the craft, the tech, and the business of it, this is kind of the business end of the discussion where we talk about the different sort of components that make up a sort of your method. When it comes to characters, because characters are a big part of fictional audiobooks. Possibly non-fictional, but not generally. What's your method in terms of how do you keep it consistent? Do you go through and do all the character lines at the same time to do it, or that kind of thing? Do you research accents? Do you engage with the author to say how they like it done, or is it just your interpretation? What kind of is your approach?
All of the above.
That was easy.
Yeah, moving on. Let me see. Just you threw in the thing about non-fiction, and it's one of the rules is really, generally speaking, you don't put voices on non-fiction because you're trying to do real people. So, there have been times when it's okay, Churchillian books, you talk like that, and we shall fight them on the beach. Well, you don't want to overdo it, but things like that. But often, we've got people from around the world, presidents, prime ministers, whatever, and kings and queens, and you don't want to be, if they're in quote, you don't want to give them voices because it's just distracting. So that's one of the rules. Whenever I say rules, I always remember Prunella Scales, an actress in Britain who played Basil Fawlty's wife in Fawlty Towers. Wonderful actress. Timothy West's wife, Samuel West's mother. She gave me a list of things for spoken English and poetry. One of the things at the top of both of them was these rules are for the sake of, making sense and so on and so forth, so forth. Also break these rules for the sense of making sense and whatever. So there are no rules. So when I say the rule is, you can break it, but as a guide, a good way of starting. But character voices. I mean, I remember just going back to the beginning, when I did audiobooks for the blind, sitting in the green room with actors from the West End. I was in radio, and there were people from Radio 3 and 4 and actors and stuff sitting around. And there was one fellow who insisted no character voices whatsoever. He was one of the old school. And that was prevalent for some time, even here, I think. But generally speaking, I was always somebody who loved putting character voices in, and for the book to make sense, because quite often you have a long page of dialogue and you don't know who said what unless you give them a little bit of oomph. If you've got the page in front of you, you can reference back and go, oh, that's him speaking, or you get a sense of what they're saying, may give you a guide to who it is who's speaking. But I think character voices help. And the thing about audiobooks is I don't have my audience thinking too hard about things like that. Who say I want it to flow. I want people to understand and to keep with me. I don't read fast, but I read faster than some. But I like to keep it, so that they can follow the thread. So that's the main reason for doing character voices. Now, how I do them, I know Jim Dale, who's an extraordinary narrator, and he did all the Harry Potters over here, the US Harry Potters. Stephen Fry did the ones in the UK, but Jim Dale would break down the characters before he even starts the book, and he'll work on the voices before he even starts the book. I tend to, and I think that's a wonderful way of doing things, very organized, but I'm not very organized. I tend to take my guide from the moment. I understand who the people are. I understand the background. I always mention Dickens here because he always did a wonderful thing. Well, he named his characters in a certain way, Mr. Jolly. So, you know.
There's a clue there.
There's a clue. Yeah, there's often a little clue in that, but also he'd often spend a paragraph describing them before they open their mouth. And as an actor, that's all gold. I mean, that's just wonderful. It feeds you, and then I open my mouth, and what comes out is what comes out in the moment most of the time. And I don't. At that point, I get an idea in my head of what they look like. Sometimes it's not so much these days. Well, no, still these days, I'd actually put a face on it of an actor. If I'm doing an Alec Guinness voice, I can't. I used to quote this and say Alec Guinness because I could do an Alec Guinness-ish voice. I'd think of this guy, this school teacher was an Alec Guinness type. Now, me doing an Alec Guinness voice, you probably wouldn't know it was Alec Guinness, but that doesn't matter. Doing a John Wayne voice, it may not sound like John Wayne or something, but in my head, it's what comes out.
It's an attitude.
I hook it onto that character. It's an attitude. It's also a way I nail the name onto that guy's forehead.
A reference, yeah. So it's kind of a visual reference.
You know, So it's 20 chapters later on, I go, oh, that was Alec Guinness. You know, when Dr. Smith walks into the room again, oh, it's Alec Guinness, and I've got the voice. It's there, and that's the way. If you're doing one book, I have to talk about this because I'm doing this, as I say, this fantasy book, which is the 5th in a series. And I haven't done one of these in about a year and a bit. So I had to go through the script and find all the people who opened their mouths.
Right, and then reference the old ones.
In the first 9 chapters, there's like 2.5 pages of names, about 18 names. Wow. And then I go back to the other books and match up the voices that I used there. Right. And it slowly comes back to me. And I remember people who are organized make voice files at the time.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not great on that, and actually, I have done it on times, and then I lose the voice file because it's 2 years between books. Yeah. And I go, where did that one go? I thought I kept it. I guess I didn't save it. I guess I trashed it along with something else. And so, but generally, the way I remember them during the book is that I see the actors on the stage.
Interesting. And do you, as part of your sort of research, do you cold read books or do you pre-read them so that you know what's coming up effectively?
Yeah, that varies. The golden rule when you're beginning audiobooks, you're a beginner, is read everything. Read it at least once.
Pre-read it. So just get familiar with the text.
Yeah. And I don't do that. And I've never been one to go in detail, except the two different things. One is when I had to go to a studio and I had a producer or a director and an engineer or something, they're relying on me, time is of essence, I would pre-read the book so I knew what was going on. Because otherwise you're wasting people's time. If you're sitting back and going, now what shall I do here? The other occasion is, if it is a mystery, I need to know who the good guys are and the bad guys are. If it's a real sort of thriller of that kind, it's crucial to know that. Most books, you know, I don't wing it. I mean, things like the Dickens and the Trollops and the Hardys, I would actually get quick notes, you know, the spark notes, all those, and just go through. Oh yeah, okay, got it.
Nice, like a quick cheat sheet.
Yeah, I saw a thread on Facebook. I don't go on very much these days, but I saw a thread where somebody's going, you know, I'm starting in this business. I'm reading my books 2 or 3 times. I've heard somebody say they read it 4 or 5 times. How many times do you think I should read it? And they're like, no, stop. I get it. People are nervous about that. And I think you need to read it as many times as you need to be comfortable. I happen to be a good sight reader. I trust my instincts. I've been doing it for so many years, 40 years or something. So I trust my instincts. So I can jump on a page and I'm into it, and give me a few clues about the characters and boom, I can do the voices. Also, as I said, if I'm in a studio, I will pre-read and plan stuff much more. If I'm here, which is 99% of the time, I've got time to, if I get into a chapter and I've given somebody a voice that I suddenly don't like, I can go back and start again. It's just me. It's just my time. I'm the one who's penalized by my sloppiness. That said, as I say, if you're a beginner, it really pays to do the research and to have a good idea in your head. As I say, until you feel comfortable. And if that's one reading, go with it. You don't, because somebody else does something in a certain way, doesn't mean you have to do it that way. You can experiment. I think that's a good thing. That's the thing about teaching. This is the experience of the teacher. It takes, in my experience, it takes somebody two readings to really get comfortable with it. Try it. And if that's too much, for me, I like, and this is a lazy man's argument, I suppose, all right? But I like the sense of surprise. And I know as actors, we can be surprised every night of the week with the same lines in a play. So, it's an acting skill to be surprised, but I still like to feed me. Otherwise, books become very dull and boring. If I've read them 3 times, if I read every book 3 times before I get in front of a microphone, I will not enjoy this work.
Yeah, and you'll be able to hear that in your voice. Yeah, absolutely.
It's more likely that than the fact that, because I can, it's that. I don't think the fact that I am acting surprised. Yeah, you'll hear it. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. One of the best quotes I ever heard was, "Be prepared but not rehearsed," because that rehearsal thing kind of gets rid of some of that energy that you bring to a text when you first are interrogating it. It's got that
hard. It's like reading. When you begin driving, and you're behind the wheel and you're looking about 2 yards down the road, or meters, depending on what system you're using, and it's really, oh God, and then you get to a corner and I got to turn the corner.
Yeah. You think about everything. Yeah.
You think about everything. Whereas, as a driver of years experience, you're looking way down the road. And as a narrator, that's sort of the way you've got to be. You can't be looking at the words. It's a weird thing to say this, but I'm not reading the words. I'm looking beyond the words.
It's absolutely.
The words are being processed in my brain, because that's the way you get to what's beyond. There's a whole world beyond that the words are basically suggesting. And
absolutely,
the way through to the author's mind is that way. But if you're plugging each word in, this is where you get the awful beginners thing of emphasizing too many words. That's one thing, and emphasizing every the and a, instead of going people just will express every single word.
Yeah, exactly. So it's more about taking a step back and trying to get the communicate concepts rather than the language itself. Like, the language is just a vehicle for the concept, and it's worth trying to, like you say,
yourself.
Yeah. Very good, very good. And just quickly, do you have much contact with authors at all? Because I imagine people think that you're sitting down having coffees with the authors every morning before you start recording, but it's probably not the case for many of them.
No, some of them. I mean, it's difficult. Dickens has never answered any of my emails, but when they're alive, they're usually very happy to chat and discuss things. And I do like to be in touch if I can be. Publishers are very careful. They don't want narrators. They're generally protective of that separation. Yeah. They like to be the middle people, and I totally understand that. That said, I've been around long enough. I just want to talk to the author. I mean, trust me, man. I'll be okay. I'm not going to embarrass you. But part of the issue was, I don't know if it's still the case now, but they used to get upset because narrators would call an author directly, and the author would go, "Oh, I didn't know they were making an audiobook. I wanted to narrate this," and then that would cause issues with the publisher and whatever. Yeah, so that was one of the reasons for having that boundary between you. I've always liked to contact the author if the book needs it.
For pronunciations and for context, perhaps?
Well, I think, I'm thinking specifically of the book I did. I did The Prestige by Christopher Priest. It was made into a movie as well. He's a wonderful author, and was a friend for years. I sort of lost touch with him. He moved off to the West Country in England, and I haven't seen him for years. But I did The Prestige, and I tried to contact him, and it didn't get any response. And it's basically, I think there's 3-4 different, I think 5 characters, and I don't want to give away another story, but I launched into it and I couldn't get in touch with him. And I was quite a long way through. It's only a 7-hour book. I think it's 4 or 5 hours when he finally came back to me and said, "Sorry, I was traveling in France." And I had a phone call with him. And he gave me such, I can't even remember the details of it, but gave me a different perspective on it. And I just threw out everything I'd done and started again. I don't do that very often because it's time consuming, but that was extraordinarily useful. Pronunciations, obviously. I mean, there are times I've spent a lot of time on the phone with people or emailed them generally, and got a long list of pronunciations. That's often with the fantasy books and stuff like that. Some good friendships have come out of that. I'm doing the book after this one is by one of my favorite living authors, Guy Gavriel Kay, who's just, I love his writing. I just love it. And I can't remember how or when we first met, but I ended up, he sets up in different parts of the world and writes for, a month or something. And he was in Monterey, and my wife and I went down and stayed overnight, and he introduced me to the Negroni cocktail. This was many years ago.
Sounds messy.
Negroni is wonderful. Check it out. Anyway, I won't go into it. I'll give you the recipe. I'm his sort of go-to guy. He insists on me for all his books, and this next one is a joy. And that's actually one that is not complex or anything. It's not a simple book, but I am sitting and reading it ahead of time, whereas I wouldn't necessarily put the time aside in the detail that I'm doing this one, just because it's it's a really deep book, and I want to get it right. And
it's personal,
it's personal, yeah. But I will always I will reach out if the author's alive and is interested in chatting. I will try to contact them and get some, because they can give you insights and so on beyond pronunciations and stuff like that. And pronunciations quite often are just, you send a list to the publisher and they send a list to the author who then sends it back. And
yeah, exactly.
I'd like the author to read them, actually.
Exactly. I was going to say, because I mean, it's horrible trying to get a phonetic version, because of course in different accents, phonetics have completely different meanings. So it's a challenge. So moving on to the technology, the tech space, because you record a lot of your own stuff, you run your own studio. I can see in the background. I like to see what I can get in the background. You used to have a whisper room, I think, or something like that. And the videos on your website, you had a sort of one of those booths with the window and stuff. But that looks like more like an inbuilt one now.
Nope. No. This is my. See if I.
Oh, we can do a tour.
Secrets. No, this whole room was built 2 years ago. See my forehead. This is how I used to talk to my mother on Zoom. Was always like this. We'd be sitting there like that. I had this built at the bottom of the garden. It was actually completed 2 years ago, almost exactly. This I'd had up north in San Francisco, and it's a 6x4 vocal booth. So it is exactly as you say, one with a window in it.
Yeah.
And it fits nicely in the middle here.
Oh, that's nice, isn't it? And it's inside of the big room. Air conditioning duct as well, which many people would be like, I wish I had good air conditioning, but it's important for you.
Well, there are times it hasn't. I mean, I bought the on the top there is that box. Yeah, that box there on the top there is the sort of allows air in and out. It's a filter, sort of keeps the sound. It was never that successful, but I managed to insulate it. And it goes in one of these boxes here and out on one of the others. The room itself is pretty cool. I have a mini vac, I think they call it, on the wall up there, which I can run, and it makes barely any noise.
Well, that's good. Yeah, absolutely.
So by the time, this is a double-walled booth, vocal booth. So by the time I'm in here, I don't know if I can put a light on and you can see it.
And you've got is that a U87?
It's a U87. The story behind that, I started off with a $50 Shaw 30 years ago, and I ended up going to a Neumann TLM 103, which is a pretty standard one. I found that one. I found it allowed too much sort of surrounding noisy, and it didn't please me hugely. I went with a Sennheiser 416. Is that it?
Yes, that's what I'm speaking on now.
And again, I liked it because it's one I experienced at Blackstone Audiobook Studios when I went up there sometime to record, and I thought it was nice and clean, but it's too clean.
It's too clean. Exactly. It's kind of harsh.
So I started looking around, and I had a couple of other ones I tested, and then I thought, I'll try the U87. I hope to God I don't like it because it's expensive. And here it is.
There it is. Yeah, exactly. Mine's in my drawer at the moment because I actually bought one on that basis, and I tried it in my studio, and it just doesn't sound good in this room. But I'm building a new studio, which will be open in the next month, and I really hope, since I've invested in this mic, that it's going to sound good, because I found it was picking up again too much ambience of this room, and the 416 is so much more directional. That was working better. But yeah, do you enjoy the technology behind studios and recording?
Yeah, in a way. I mean, I'm definitely not technophobic. I love it. I just don't remember so much. You set something up. I got stuff here. This is I got a Mac Mini.
Mm-hmm.
I got an Apollo's Twin Solo, whatever it is. I actually use a Grace. That's the one, the M103. I've got a PreSonus. This is one, the ADL 700 valve one, which I actually don't use.
Right. Yeah.
He wants to buy one, but yeah. So I've got and the thing is, you set these things up and you get them working, and then 5 years later on, something goes wrong. You're going, how on earth did I do that? How was that set up?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, consistency is a massive thing. If they want to come and do a chapter or an update or something, then sometimes it's. But I suppose you basically deliver them as one thing, and then that's it. They're very rarely would you.
It never changes. I mean, I never change. I never change my settings.
Yeah.
They were set years ago. If I brushed against it and knocked all the things, I'd be like, oh my God, how did I? How was it set up?
Exactly.
I think I did photograph it once a few years ago, but no, I mean, in terms, because I have to do pickups, I have to do corrections that have to fit into the book. So basically, I never change it. I experimented with various different positions on the microphone, and then.
And which setting on the U87, the cardioid pattern or figure eight or the Omni?
Yeah,
cardioid, yeah, absolutely. That's pretty much
sort of thing.
Yeah, the kidney sort of shaped one. And what audio software are you using to run? Because I didn't recognize it from the videos on your website.
Yeah, well, this is back when, because I think I was one of the first people to use to record directly to a computer, because we used DAT and cassettes in 93, 94 cassettes, audio cassettes, and then DAT, and then I know some people went to ADAT. I didn't. I went straight to a hard drive in 1996 because I was just going through the separation, and I thought I'll try this because I do love the technical side of things. I love experimenting with things like that when I can. So I got one, and it was like a 4 megabyte RAM and 120 megabyte hard drive.
Wow.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I'd record for an hour, and it would take half an hour to save.
Is that right?
Seriously,
Wow.
seriously. I'm talking 1996, 97. It would take half an hour. I'd finish recording my hour, set it to save it, and I'd walk away and hope we didn't have a power outage or anything, because the whole thing would go. But at that time, I was looking for the software, and it was like, I didn't know. There was no internet to go and ask. I think I did have a World Wide Web box or something that allowed me to access, but there was nobody selling anything, no advice. And I went to a music store, and they sold me Cubase, which is a music editing software, which had as a tiny part of it Wavelab 1.0, Steinberg's Wavelab 1.0. And I stayed with Steinberg ever since. So this is Steinberg's 11 or something.
Right. Yeah.
So
I've definitely heard of people using Wavelab. It's uncommon, but it's not unheard of.
I really liked it. And I've tried to go with Pro Tools from time to time.
Pro Tools is too complicated for most.
Too complicated, and it never did. And I don't know if you, I record straight. I don't do punch and roll, or rock and roll, or whatever they call it. I've tried that at times, but my argument about sticking with it is I have more control this way, because I worked in radio for years, so I edited tapes with a little razor blade and so on. So I know to listen for where you can edit.
Totally, yeah. That's such a skill, and it's almost becomes an instinct. Like, because I'm the same now. I have a very specific way of doing cuts, and I can almost edit without listening now, because I know the shape of my voice and where I will pick up from, etc. So
right. So it's the little yellow pencil back in the day, but I find that with Pro Tools, you've got to consolidate the thing afterwards, and it does the crossfades, and you really have very little control over, you might cut half breaths and all the rest of it, which is what the publishers you send, the engineers will then be cleaning up. But also you end up using the last take. I mean, I know there's options, because stores them all on the side when you do retakes and stuff like that.
Mm.
You can send a whole package. But with this, if I can edit, like you say, I can edit in the middle of sentences on C's and S's and F's and K's and all the rest of it, and the very beginning of words, middle. But also, if I do 3 takes of a sentence, say, I can take the beginning of the second sentence and the end of the second sentence and the beginning of the third take, and put them together, and I can clean it up that way. If it sounds, most of the time, I'm just doing straight edits.
I'm exactly the same. I just use the 2-track editor and then just keep it simple. And then, and do you have a method of noting visually when you make a mistake, like a click or a dog clicker or something like that?
I have a. I don't know if you can see on here, but if I let me put a little A on here, because that's tomorrow's file I'm going to do.
Oh, yeah, you get a little marker.
If I record, so that's it in record. Yeah. And I've got a little marker button on the side. It's over here. That's cool. And I'll just drop the marker. I'll make a fluff.
Yep.
I'll do that, and I'll do it again or whatever. And then when I stop, get that out of the way. There's a couple of yellow markers on the top here.
Yeah.
And basically, I'll just go to that. I've got I edit on my iMac over there, and I've got a programmed mouse, and I just hit one button and it jumps to the next marker.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
I highlight, I hit another button, it erases or cuts it out. I've got various shortcuts, which makes editing really quick. I'm very fast.
Absolutely. As long as you've disciplined enough and have programmed yourself to actually, when you do make a mistake, put those in, because it takes a while to build up that instinct of like, I've made a mistake, I'll do this, and then later on I'll know exactly what it is.
Well, the hardest part, and I still deal with it, is the when you've got the record thing up, it's a very small little corner, little button to press that does it, and sometimes the mouse drifts off it. So I'll think I'm clicking it and I'm not. Oh, no. And the publishers fortunately know that from me occasionally, and they know I do that, and it's a very straightforward retake usually. So
absolutely. So you kind of have options depending on who you're working with, don't you? Whether you provide just the raw session, whether you do edited versions as well, because it increases the costs and the time, obviously.
Sit back over here.
Yeah, by all means.
Carrying the. I mostly do the editing. It's rare. I think there are a few occasions when I work for Penguin Random House, the one I'm doing for Guy Gavriel Case through Penguin Random House, and they want a producer on the line. So I'll have a director listen to me, and he or she will be making notes, and I won't need to drop a marker or anything. So I'll basically just record, send it off to them, which is the way they work in their studios. Whenever I go into Woodland Hills in Los Angeles, I've done a couple, not for a while. I did a George R.R. Martin a couple of years ago, and that was the last time I was in the studio.
It does feel like a wonderful treat when you go into and you're literally just reading. I've definitely had that experience.
I have to say, I get very nervous. For this book, I know the first few chapters are going to be a little difficult because I'm aware somebody's listening. And one of the joys when I'm working alone is nobody's listening. But actually being in the studio is it is a whole different atmosphere when you're in the studio, and you can just there's somebody there taking care of it, they're taking care of the levels, and they'll listen for everything. I don't know that I don't do a better job sometimes when I'm at home on my own. Because I'm very, very judgmental. And I will retake more because I hear it if I'm letting somebody else take care of it, they're not always stopping me when I think, because I'm not thinking in that way. I'm just reading, in the story, telling the story and so on, but I'm not thinking in a sort of directorial way. I know there are people who don't like that sort of, having to think of 3 different things, but I'm actually quite capable of thinking 3 different things while I'm doing narration.
I'm exactly the same. Yeah, exactly. On live sessions, I'm happy to run the recording and do all the other stuff as well. It's kind of exhilarating in a funny way. I'm very aware of the time because we've been talking for 65 minutes, and it's been so wonderful that I've been carried away. So I've got a few more questions. If you've got a few more minutes to indulge me.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, wonderful. We barely started. I mean, we got.
So this is more around the business of audiobooks, because not many people really get an insight into it until they actually become an audiobook narrator, and how does the business of audiobooks work? Obviously, you've got relationships with publishers, which are probably your most important asset, and then you've got independent authors and people approaching you directly. And whether you do like you record it for free and then share the royalties. There's all kinds of options out there these days. So, do you want to take us through some of those options?
I can try. I again, one of the reasons I don't do a lot of coaching and stuff is because I don't have the tools that are needed to begin. I could rely just on the publishers. They have come to me over the years, with Blackstone Audio for many years, and then I did go into New York for an APA, Audio Publishers Association event. They run a conference every year, and you get a chance to meet publishers and so on and so forth. And I met some, and a couple of years later, Tantor asked me to do stuff, and then Books on Tape, which became Random House, and then Penguin Random House. So, and then somebody else in the industry will call me from another publishers and so on. So I could just work for publishers, which is, of course, if you're starting in the business, that's nearly impossible. You've got to get something out there. The one thing that, and again, this is what I don't really know the full details, but I have worked through ACX a couple of times. But I know some people go, ooh, ACX, because it can be a bit dodgy. There are a lot of pitfalls. I would recommend going onto Facebook and joining some of their groups. I hate to recommend Facebook. It does have its uses.
It is a meeting place, isn't it? And like you say, especially with COVID, like the conferences just weren't happening or aren't happening. Does it still happen, the audiobook conferences? Or yeah,
I believe it's happening soon. I'm not attending this year, but I think it's online. Very soon. Yeah. But ACX, you audition. You do everything yourself and at home, and you can do royalty share, but there are a lot of scams out there you got to keep an eye on. So I would highly recommend researching and maybe even just spending some time with an experienced narrator, not me, but somebody who teaches or somebody who coaches, who or you can learn by looking on Facebook. There is a great website called the Narrators Roadmap, and Karen Cummings. I think if I can, sorry, I'm
sure.
you.
Yeah, I think you have it mentioned on your website there about you've got a section for sort of people who want to find out more.
The Narrators, the website is something I got redone last year, and I haven't touched it in a year, but it's still got some information on there. The Narrators Roadmap, that is it. Narrators Roadmap to a search. I think they have a free level. I think she started charging to get into the real weeds of the thing, but I think there's a lot of good contacts you can get from that, and it gives you a lot of information of things to watch out for. It's really important to pay attention, because there are people who put stuff out on ACX for recording. There are some horror stories of people recording a whole book and then finding the person who asked them to do it didn't have the rights.
Oh, good Lord.
And
that
just
would be
given away, because especially, I would do a 15-hour book in a week or a week and a half. And people might spend a month doing a book like that and then find that they're not going to get any money for it because the book will never be allowed out.
Gosh, that would be a shame, wouldn't it?
Things to watch out for in the business,
Yeah, absolutely. You describe it on your site as, the least well-paid job in voiceover, which, in my experience, is kind of the case in terms of word count. Anyway, it's not like you get, $10,000 for 10,000 words. So it's kind of a labor of love. The conditions are a lot better in a way in terms of if you love reading books, then you get something from it aside from the money, which I think is quite nice. A lot like, I do it. I'm starting to do a lot of documentary work, and I'm loving it because I'm learning so much from doing the documentaries. It's really enriching my life in that sense, as well as doing the work and getting paid for it. So, is it the same with audiobooks? Do you find you are very learned from all of these titles?
Very much so. It is exactly that reason I fell into it, because I just love doing it, and I didn't mind. I did, say, 8 years for charity. One afternoon a week, I give my time up because I loved reading the books. I've always enjoyed reading. It's not well paid, and e-learning is so much better paid because you are paid by the word in e-learning. So many other areas, voiceovers, you do a commercial and you can get thousands and stuff, but audiobooks it's the marathon, it's not the sprint. It's the joy of doing it. A lot of people, I wonder about the people coming into the industry and expecting to make a living, and it takes a long time to get to that point. We're fortunate the union in the States has come in very strong in the last decade. I'm proud to say I helped somewhat in that, because there were industries, part of some of the publishers who came in, some people came in around the time of Audible being bought by Amazon, and because they could sell stuff to Amazon, and they were paying some ridiculously low rates, like $50 for an hour, finished hour. And that's just not livable. You can't live off that, given how many hours of research you might have to put in.
It's less than minimum wage for sure, isn't it?
So you're ending up being paid less than minimum wage. So the union has come in and done a very good job of minimal level of pay, and the publishers have been very good in that respect.
Fantastic. So coming towards the end, I am going to bring up a question, a slightly different question than the one I crossed out, which is, what do you think your best work is? Not necessarily your favorite, but if people were to jump into your sort of career, what's your best foot forward?
Well, I did love the Dickens. I always loved the Dickens. And Great Expectations, you mentioned, that won awards. I mean, in some ways, it's easy for me to go to the ones that won awards, because that's had confirmation from elsewhere.
Right. Yeah.
But I do like, I did which on Nicholas Nickleby was lovely, because one of the early days, oh God, who was the author? Lived in Greensboro, North Carolina. Anyway, he did a blog about how he was quite a well-known, he's a well-known author, and he did a blog about how he'd never understood this book when he was given it at school, and then he listened to my audiobook, and it made complete sense. And that's something that audiobook narrators do, because people don't read a lot. There are people who do have difficulty reading. And the thing is, if you're reading something like, if you're American reading Dickens or Trollope, it's written in an English way. The language, the structure of the sentences are hard to pull off the page for some people, whereas a narrator actually brings it to life in a way that you can understand more easily. So things like the Dickens, the one that sort of was the big one for me early on was The Girl with a Dragon Tattoo. That's always been a very well respected, and a lot of people would say about that reading it, they couldn't get into it at the beginning, because there's a long stretch at the beginning of the book, but listening to me give it character really helped them into it, and that got me a huge number of fans. I loved Alan Moore's Jerusalem. Alan Moore is the author of many graphic novels, V for Vendetta, and several others I have in my bookcase. But Watchmen and things like that. He's an eccentric. He wrote this magnum opus. It's 70 hours long.
Wow.
And when he wrote it, I got the call. Somebody, I can't remember who it was, said, could I do it? I recorded books. And I called Neil Gaiman, because I didn't call him, I emailed him, because I know he knew Alan Moore well. And I said, hey, I'm doing this one. He said, well, do you want me to introduce you to Alan Moore? And I actually flew to England. I got in touch with him. There's a whole long story there, but he's a bit eccentric, doesn't have a regular phone or anything. He's sort of off the grid. But I had a little bit of time before I started the book, and I recognized what this book meant to him. It was based in his hometown of Northampton. I flew out on a Monday, met him on the Wednesday, flew back on the Thursday, and was in the studio on the Friday. All the way to England, off my own bat. I paid for that myself. The publisher didn't pay for it. And I loved that book, 70 hours long. Every chapter is sort of written in the style of a different author. But all the stories based in the history of Northampton. Is it Northampton? I'm saying that right? Yes. Sometimes I slip up. If I got that wrong, I apologize. Somebody will go, no, it was Northampton. It wasn't Northampton. I know that. It was Northampton, I think. But that's a lovely one. Yeah.
Yeah. 70 hours that's a very long time to keep it fresh and keep people's attention. Is that the longest audiobook you would have done?
Yeah, it's close to it. I did Dance to the Music of Time. Anthony Powell did a series of books back he started writing them quite early on and finished in the 70s. He wrote 12 novels, separated into quartets now, but it's all as a whole called Dance to the Music of Time, and it basically follows a group of people, one particular person and his group, through the pre-First World War through to the 70s. And it's an extraordinary historical document to look at English society, a certain sort of level of it. That, I think, is 86 hours.
Wow.
And of course, the complete Sherlock Holmes I did all that in one go, and that's 60 or 70 hours, I think. So these ones, yeah, those are the ones I've done in blocks. I mean, there's a series like this one I'm finishing 27 hours, which is the fifth one. And each of the other books has been like 15 or 18 or 20 hours. So it gets up there eventually, but I've had that separated, so that's separate.
Yeah,
but yeah, some big ones. I would recommend, I mean, the Guy Gavriel Kay books are a joy, and Tigana is a fantastic one of his early ones. There's so many, and Christopher Priest book I mentioned earlier, I love doing that. And they'll occur to me, the books that I
it always does.
That one. I should have mentioned that one. It's very hard. I mean, it depends what people want to listen to, what kind of books they want to listen to. It's very hard to recommend anything in particular, but the ones I've enjoyed have been those: Jerusalem, Dance to the Music of Time, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
Fantastic. Oh, well, we've taken up a lot of your time with this interview, so thank you so much for your time. Just before we go, there's lots of guitars on the wall behind you, and do you play the guitar as well?
Yes. Well, I've had a guitar since I was a kid, and I've sort of come back to it in the last decade, I suppose. I had a couple. That one, there's one there that I got in 1980. That's a Les Paul copy from it's an Antoria, which is one of the Japanese makes, but it's the oldest one I've got. But I had that one for years, and I had a band when I was a student. And I played a lot, and then I just sort of I've been messing around ever since. And then a few years ago, I promised myself I wanted a Les Paul, because that was when I grew up in the 60s, watching everybody, Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, they're all playing Les Pauls, and I wanted one. And I thought, well, I got in sort of late 50s, and I thought, well, when I can really play well and I'll deserve a Les Paul, I'll go get one. And I hit 60 and went, screw this. I'm never going to play that well. So I bought one, and that's on the wall in the corner over there.
Oh, yeah.
And when I got the Les Paul and I started doing online lessons, I liked the Telecaster. And then, my wife and kids got me the HSS Stratocaster. The PRS is a 10 top. That's the blue one. A really nice, beautiful piece. And I've got this was my latest joy. It's the a Gibson 1959 reissue ES335.
Oh, beautiful.
Which is gorgeous. And I'm doing online lessons with a guy. Well, it's online because we don't meet up, but he's in LA. And,
wow.
And I'm finding it's great. It's a wonderful challenge, but I'm really finding the basic stuff. It's like, I forgot how does my finger do that? So it's really embarrassing. So I'm embarrassed if I'm one of those guys, there's a name for me, and I can't remember what it is. The kind of people who have more money than guitar talent.
I'm sure there is a name.
Anyway, I'm guilty, but I'm actually getting better and better. And I've got a drum machines and things. I got a drum kit around the corner. There's a bass I've got up in the house too. So I think I can play. I'm always self-deprecating, but I can play somewhat. And I love that. And also, I'm getting older. And one of the things they say about keeping the brain alive is challenging yourself.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't want to keep doing the same old. I mean, the books, I adore the books, but I'm sort of edging them out a little bit, not doing as many hours a day as I used to, so that I have time for things like this.
Yeah, it's great. Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you wanted to cover that we haven't in the interview?
Well, there's, of course, Ukraine.
So we could spend a very long time talking. Maybe we should do in the second episode.
No, say hi to your mum for me, won't you?
Will do. Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, well, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you for sharing some of your wisdom and the stories from behind the scenes of Audiobook World. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Toby. It was a joy.